Today's episode of All God's People marks two very significant milestones for us. Hi, I'm Connie Vandeman Jeffrey. Today is the 10th anniversary of an historic vote by the Pacific Union Conference. Exactly 10 years ago on August 19, 2012, at a special Union Constituency Session, it was voted to approve ordination to the gospel ministry without regard to gender in the Pacific Union Conference territory. In the coming weeks, we'll talk with President Bradford Newton, Executive Secretary Sandy Roberts, and Executive Vice President Leon Brown about their own personal thoughts and reflections on the 10th anniversary of this historic vote and what it means to us now and in the future. Look for those interviews on All God's People beginning next week. We're also celebrating today because this is our 250th episode of All God's People. I'm so grateful for the opportunity that we have had over the past 5 years to tell more than 750 stories and bring you news and inspiration from across our beautiful Pacific Union territory, spanning 5 states and 7 conferences. We didn't know when we started that we'd be encountering a worldwide pandemic. It has impacted the way we communicate, and it would leave us grieving the loss of church members and affect us in ways we hadn't imagined. Producing and hosting All God's People during this time has been both a challenge and a great blessing for our production team. The stories from our churches, schools, and institutions never fail to inspire us. We marked the heroism of our healthcare workers and the teachers who kept teaching, the pastors who kept preaching, the members who kept faithfully praying and supporting their church through tithes and offerings. Words and phrases like Zoom, cohorts, online education, social distancing, I think you're on mute, and so many more colored our vocabulary. And there was tremendous loss. Collectively, we grieved. Personally and quietly, we grieved. And yet through it all, God was there for us. And the stories kept pouring in of how you, the members, teachers, pastors, administrators, pathfinders, youth, adults, and seniors, demonstrated God's love and care for each other and to your community in the best of times and the worst of times. We tried to tell your stories well. Here's a look back at some of the highlights of All God's People from our very first program in 2017 to our 100th, 150th, and 200th episodes, plus special programs from various holidays and milestones. Welcome to All God's People, the place where we share news, information, and inspiration. I'm Connie Vandeman Jeffrey, and it's nearly Christmas. Each week on All God's People, we are so happy to bring you stories about what's happening in God's church. And I hope you're inspired and feel more connected to your local church community through this simple video program. How do you capture the history of the Adventist Church in a territory that encompasses nearly 500,000 square miles? How can a few stories of a handful of people properly represent a church of more than 813 churches and companies with 223,422 members, who come from dozens of different cultures and worship each week in approximately 30 different languages? From Arizona to Hawaii, from California to Nevada and Utah, we have the most amazing stories this week, and they provide an abbreviated glimpse into what our schools are doing. The social justice statement can be found on the Let Justice Roll page on the AdventistFaith.com website. It includes a number of scriptural references that illustrate the importance of this topic in our faith and practice. Adventists are not a liturgical church, so we don't have a formal way in which to celebrate Easter. During the pandemic, Summit Christian Academy's 3rd and 4th graders got to see firsthand why washing your hands matters. Using lotion mixed with glitter, students were able to observe how germs transfer after shaking hands. As we think about our young people and Pathfinder clubs journeying to the Oshkosh Camporee, as well as the diverse and varied ministries of our churches throughout the Pacific Southwest, our hope and prayer for all God's people is found in the words that Paul wrote to the church in Rome so many years ago. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in Him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. I am reminded of Ellen White's quote, "We have nothing to fear for the future, except as we shall forget the way the Lord has led us and His teaching in our past history." As I look back over these 5.5 brief years, I am reminded continually of God's leading in our lives, in our stories, in the mission of the Pacific Union. Thank you for your support and encouragement along the way. May all God's people continue to stay the course, to keep the faith, and to tell the story of how God continues to lead and direct our lives. For all God's people, I'm Connie Jeffrey.